So, Maurice Ward, inventor of Starlite. He came up with Starlite in 1986 after being a hairdresser for something like 20 years, and he took it to ICI and a manager tested it, passed it up to the bosses said, "Go away, don't ever bother us again," and Maurice dropped it in a toilet. This is true. Then he spent a year trying to reformulate it because he couldn't get it exactly right. After that, he touted it around a bit, and his big breakthrough came in 1990 when it was put in a UK television programme called Tomorrow's World. It was a BBC flagship of technology, and it ran until 2003. It appeared on there in 1999 when they coated an egg with Starlite, subjected it to a blowtorch for 5 minutes, cracked it open, and it was uncooked. That was just a wonderful piece of marketing, and people who saw that were astonished. And it actually led to the Ministry of Defence in the UK being interested in it in 1992, running tests out at Foulness, repeating those tests with the YAG laser in 1994. It was also tested by the Americans at White Sands, and NASA got extremely interested in it. So this material, invented by a hairdresser with astonishing properties, was on the verge of being a huge problem. What is Starlite? Well, Starlite was supposedly a mysterious mixture of 20 to 21 materials that had to be put together in a special sequence, and it was applied as a paint. And when the paint dried, subjected to heat, it would carbonize and foam outwards. Now, carbon's a great heat shield, and the foaming protects anything behind it, and the heat is deflected away by the carbon. Although it's supposed to be 20 to 21 mysterious chemicals, of course, we all know that many reproductions have been done using just four, including cornstarch and PVA glue. The only thing to get in the way of it was Maurice Ward. Maurice was something of an eclectic character, not averse to a bit of industrial espionage himself. He would send his children into hairdressers who would run into the back so that he could follow them, and he could pick up trade secrets on how to make wigs and how to make hairdressing products, and then promptly repeat them in his own salon. So, not a whiter-than-white character, and plagued by the idea that industrial espionage was something that he should be aware of, and he was utterly aware of it. Rumours have it that when he gave out Starlite for testing, he insisted on being in the room. If somebody tested something, they had to wash their hands to make sure they hadn't scratched a bit off. He collected all the bits and pieces, sweeping the floor to pick up any pieces that might have dropped there, just so in case they reverse engineered it. And in his head, then the product was worth billions of dollars, and presumably if it was turned into a product, it was worth billions of dollars. And what Maurice wanted was that money up front. There have been quotes of him asking for $10 billion, actually £10 billion, $14 billion upfront payment, and 51% ownership rights of any product that Starlite was going to lead to. And of course this was relatively unacceptable to quite a lot of people, and Starlite never made it into commercialisation, and Maurice passed away in 2011. So although Starlite was a fantastic material, the only thing that really stopped it coming to fruition was Maurice himself.
Oh, we don't supply you the formulation. Yes. Yeah. If we give the world the formulation, that's exit us.
3 years later, or 2 years later actually, in 2013, a Californian company called Thermoshield acquired the formula, or so they say, from Maurice's daughters, and they began to do the egg cooking experiments on YouTube, and you can see the 2013, and I think the last one was 2021, and they're claiming they have the original Starlite, and they themselves are now trying to commercialise it, but as far as I'm aware, they still haven't had investment in it. So I don't know any more details on it apart from that Thermoshield LLC have it. They're in California, they're still experimenting with it, they have a Twitter account and a YouTube account that you can have a look at what it is they're up to. Now, to my mind, the messages here in Starlite aren't so much to do with Starlite. I think they're more to do with the approach of Maurice. For one thing, we have this idea that ideas are unique and can never be repeated, and well, that's not true. As Maurice showed one important thing, he showed that it could be done, and he showed the result of doing it. And of course there are research companies all over the world who are interested in this sort of stuff, and just knowing something can be done can be a huge impetus into the research of that thing. And now of course the market is absolutely flooded with the kind of paints and kind of coatings that Starlite represented, and they're pretty impressive, and the results look very much like Starlite. Of course Thermalite, who spent money on Starlite for an undisclosed amount, said that this stuff is nowhere near as good as Starlite, and that may or may not be true, but the simple fact is the Starlite replication is already out there. Work has been done and turned into products by people. So although Starlite itself may be better, it may come to a product courtesy of ThermoShield, it's already too late. It was a perfect time back in 1990 when there was no competition, and this was an amazing result. Had Morris been able to do something with it, then without a doubt he would have been the leader of the field. But having lost all of that time now to other researchers, and with the confused market of paints declaring this, that and the other, and there being a lot of competition, Starlite in my mind certainly has lost its edge. If it can sell on the mystique, and it is as good as they say it is, then maybe it will get a place in that market, but it won't dominate the market like it would have done. It's missed its chance. And that's the thing about inventions. When you invent something and show it, what you're doing is showing it can be done. Sometimes the details just aren't needed. You don't need the details because you can find them yourself through your own research. There's plenty of smart people out there in the world. The other lesson that I take from Morris is this over precaution. Now, as I hinted at earlier in the video, it could be because Morris himself wasn't whiter than white that he suspected everybody was trying to steal his ideas, because that's what he would have done.
But there was nothing wrong with the company, but I said it wasn't right for what I was wanting to do. I could see where they could gain from my business, but I couldn't gain from theirs.
But worrying too much about this is one of those things that means that you will never get an invention into a product. An idea itself doesn't actually have any value. It only has value when it's turned into a product and sold. If you own a gold mine and the gold is not dug out of the ground, that gold has no value. It only has value until you dig it out of the ground and purify it and it becomes gold. When it's dirt, it's just a big pile of dirt. So mines are a fine example of this. They don't have any value until work is put into them to turn them into products. It's the same thing with ideas. Until you put work into it to turn that into a product in and of itself, it doesn't have a value. It has a potential value, but not a real value. Now, when you work at something to turn that into an actual product, of course, it's very rare for one person to do that. I would say unheard of. Usually, you're working with a team of people, and the contributions those people make in that team are of equal value to the contribution that the idea generator makes. It's a team of people that move things along and creates things. It's not really one individual. We just live in an individualistic society where we point at somebody and say, oh look, they invented such and such. And usually, of course, it's completely wrong, like Marconi and the radio. We all know it was Tesla. And usually we get it wrong, so much so there's actually a syndrome named after that. Anyway, Starlite is still alive and kicking. It's ThermoShield LLC. They're busily trying to get it out there, but they're now in a very competitive market. Now, there are two main ways of approaching fire protection. One is called intumescent. Intumescence is where you heat a material and it will give off a gas and create a foam. And the top of that foam forms a carbon surface, which is protective, but because it's a foam, that carbon surface is being pushed away from the surface you want to protect. So it burns away, forming a new carbon surface, and gives the actual surface a ton of protection. And carbon is brilliant at dissipating heat, and so the bit behind the foam, and the carbonised foam, doesn't get hot. And you can buy some great paints and materials these days that do exactly that. So although Starlite as an actual material has disappeared, Starlite as an intumescent paint that can give that kind of protection is actually on the market now under loads of different trade names, because the inventor, who stood to gain millions, wanted billions, but he showed something unintentional, that it could be done. But there is another way of approaching fire protection, and that's called ablative. Ablative protection was what was applied, sorry about that, to heat shield during the space race. The heat shield is designed to burn away. It burns away in layers, and as it burns away, it becomes a carbon that protects it, so the bit behind it doesn't burn until that bit's burnt away, and so on and so on and so on. And it is designed to burn away. And one way of noticing the difference in intumescent and ablative protection is ablative protection tends to bore a hole into the material. Intumescent tends to form bubbles on top of the material. Now, Starlite is lost. But the idea in Starlite style coatings, which perform as well, is about. But there is something that's really quite surprising. One of the great fire protection materials, believe it or not, is this stuff. Now, we'll find that difficult to believe because you use paper to start your fire. You wrinkle it up a little bit, set it alight, stick it on your fire, and it's a great way to start a fire. So who would think that that was actually a really good fire prevention material? Not like that, but like this it is. If you take one of these things and try to burn it, you'll find actually it's quite difficult to burn. Now, incidentally, I'm using this story not as a commentary on the literary merits of a Disney tale, but because it was on sale in Asda and I could buy 4 of them for £1. So, no worries. But once it's bound up like this, then it acts like an ablative material. Let me show you that. It bored a hole into the paper over 5 minutes with a butane torch, remaining cool to the touch. Actually didn't change at all. I had a thermometer on it, electrical thermometer reading the other side. No change in temperature. Boring a hole, it bored down about 80 sheets of paper in that 5 minutes of time, which is pretty impressive to think that it's just a piece of paper. However, we can take that Starlite idea, and combining it with the already fire-resistant properties of paper, we can make a much better material. So if we take that paper and paint it with something that's going to create a carbon foam, and sugar's brilliant for that. And if we want to get a bit of gas in there, we put some bicarbonate of soda in there, it'll form carbon dioxide under heat, and we'll get a carbon foam as well as an ablative material. So it's a combined material. So what I've got in this cup is 20 grams of sugar, 20 grams of sodium bicarbonate, and 40 millilitres of water to make a paint. And what we're going to do is paint the pages of the book. Okay, there's the book painted. Let's stick it in the rig, turn some fire on it, and see what happens. Here are my 2 books. This is the one that was untreated, and you can see it's got a circular hole in there where the flame burnt down, burning away the layers of paper. And as these layers of paper formed carbon, they became a heat shield. They stayed as a heat shield until they flaked away, in which case the next layer of paper burnt to become a carbon, and then a heat shield, and so on, which is exactly how ablative protection works. And so paper in layers works quite well as an ablative material. Here is the one where we coated it in sugar, and you can see it's very different. It hasn't bored down very much at all. We've got this white ash here, hardly any boring down, but it has puckered it up quite a lot because it's formed a foam and pushed the paper out. And as it's pushed it out, it's created a heat shield of carbon that has burnt away eventually to the next layer, but has formed that intumescent style of protection. So what was interesting about that was that the paper is fireproofing in itself. 5 minutes under 800 degrees centigrade, 80 pages burnt away, and no transfer of heat to the back. of itself extremely impressive and counterintuitive because you'd expect paper to burn. So I thought I'd do this, which I'm calling Starlite paper. And in the great Starlite tradition, let's do a close-up of it, my hand, and a blowtorch. Kind of hard to hold this actually, but there's my hand, there's my Starlite paper, and here's my blowtorch. I have to admit, I was nervous about doing that. Okay, so what is it and why does it work? Well, actually all it is this stuff painted on ordinary paper. There's 10 sheets of just normal copier paper. This stuff obviously is the Starlite secret. And what's in here is water, borax, sodium silicate, sugar, sodium bicarbonate, and styrene butadiene rubber. Now the styrene butadiene rubber holds the whole thing together and makes it so that it can actually glue the bits of paper. Everything else does something else. Now it works because the top layer burns. As you saw, the paper actually burns. But as it burns, it gives off carbon dioxide, and the sugar in there crystallizes and forms little pockets of carbon. Now the carbon starts to burn off at 400 degrees centigrade, but because it's kind of little bubbles, it's amazingly insulating. Now we've done stuff making carbon foams where we've shown a foam on a gas ring with an ice cube on the top, and the gas ring is blazing away and the ice cube doesn't melt. It's a property of what's called non-reticulated foams. Reticulated foams are foams with little passages between them so that the whole foam can actually communicate with one cell with another. Non-reticulated foams are those where they're enclosed little spheres. A good way, actually, a good example would be polystyrene. Packing polystyrene is non-reticulated. A good example of a reticulated foam is your bath sponge. A property of non-reticulated carbon foams is amazing. Heat protection. Anything that will do that will actually give you heat protection. So Starlite is exactly the same thing, only it's mixed with flour. Well, actually Nighthawk Light's version is mixed with flour. Starlite itself is probably something else. When I was researching the video on Starlite, of course, I did a lot of research and came across a fantastic and interesting program by QED called Plastic Fantastic. Now, if you want to watch the whole program, it's about half an hour long, it's on the Internet Archive. Just put QED Plastic Fantastic in a Google search, click videos, it'll be the first one there. Issued in 1994, and it's a little bit dated, but well worth a watch, because Morris, I think, has far more to teach than just the recipe of Starlite. I mean, I don't think he intentionally taught these things, but there's so much to learn from him in terms of what to do, what's important, and what not to do. So really great stuff to have a look at if you want to have a look at it. Now, I'm often asked by people about inventing and about doing research and about experimenting. I am scientifically trained, so I understand the jargon. I'm used to reading papers. I know how to do the things that are usually necessary to do, but I don't think it's horrendously important to have that training. Have a listen to what Morris says, and have a listen to what Professor Tony Chalice from Brunel University says.
Physicists, the scientists, the Doctor Who's are all sort of blinkered, you know. They've been taught something at school, at college. They've read about it. They believe it. They haven't got an inquisitive mind. They just go along in this dull old routine that they've got, and because whoever it was 50 years ago said that can't be done, they wouldn't look beyond that. They'd accept it. And of course I don't know these things anyway, so I just go my own route.
A great deal of connection between inventorship and scientific training. And when one did an analysis of the people who made inventions in ICI, there were, in fact, a group of 6 people who had a very large number. This is measured by patents. Patents aren't perhaps a very good measure of inventorship, but they're some sort of measure. There's no other, so you use those. There were 6 people with a lot of patents. And then there was a whole group of 40 or 50 with quite a fair number, sort of including people like me. Of those 6 people who, with a lot of patents, 5 of them had not been to university. So you can see, it doesn't exactly surprise me that a chap can be an inventor without a great deal of scientific training.
And that was taken straight from the QED program, so forgive me on the video quality. But wasn't that interesting? I mean, it's clear, and I think to everybody, that a university education isn't the key to working, experimenting, understanding and inventing. What's the key is having a curious mind, having creativity, and more importantly, doing it. These are the things that are going to make you an inventor, and they're equally going to be the things that help save us from ourselves. Sitting around hoping somebody else is going to do it probably isn't. But if you're worried about getting up and trying stuff, then take a leaf from Morris's book that's backed up by Professor Tony Challis. It's important to have the creativity. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not like Morris, I'm not down against the establishment. I don't think this sort of stuff is completely beaten out of you by university systems. It's certainly something that everybody understands, but university is a process, and it's a process where you're taught to think in a certain way, and we lose ourselves to a degree in that, and we forget that creativity is an issue. Now, universities are trying to address this. There's an awful lot more going on these days than there used to be back about 20-25 years ago, so things have changed a lot. The guy who invented the liquid metal battery, for instance, his stipulation was that the people he hired had to have nothing to do with batteries, because he wanted that creativity, that lack of knowledge, which tells you, well, hey, I don't know, so let's try it and see, and you give it a go and see. It's how so many things are thought up. We just did a video on how a great leap forward is made in thermoelectric generation, because the dogma was questioned by people who didn't really know, but thought, well, what the hey, let's give it a go and see. So it doesn't matter, really, if you've got a university education or not. It would certainly help, but it doesn't matter. What matters most are a few very simple things: creativity, stubbornness, and above all, giving it a go. This is why I bang on endlessly on the channel about doing stuff, because it's doing stuff where you really learn. Now, of course, we got the great quote, and it was posted as a comment, actually, from Edison and Tesla. Edison was bitching about Tesla. No, it's the other way around, actually. Tesla was bitching about Edison. He said that if Edison had to find a needle in a haystack, what he would do was look at every single straw till he found it, and what Tesla would do was apply a little bit of theory and save himself a whole load of time. That can be true. That can work. But the thing is, either can work. And let's face it, in certainly economic terms, Edison was far more successful than Tesla, who ended up dying of poverty while trying to marry a pigeon. So it does make you question who it is who's got a more valid approach, but I don't want to do either approach down. Either approach to me are perfectly valid. That give it a go and see means you're going to do a lot of trial and error, but trial and error, I think, is the way that we actually proceed and we actually get good results. Using theory, model and experiment based on that, what we tend to do is replicate that which went before, and we get improvement on what it is rather than innovation on what it is that we're doing. But it's a ferryman. You pay your price and you take your choice. I happen to believe quite firmly that it's trial and error, willingness to do, and a creative mind that will actually solve our problems. If we want to optimize, then theory and prediction come to play. Anyway, if you're mulling over doing something and you think that you haven't got the education to do it, certainly don't let that stop you. You may not actually 100% understand why it's working, but you may well get something to work that nobody else would have ever thought of. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to like and subscribe.